There are moments in life when the noise finally stops, not because things are peaceful, but because everything has already fallen apart. Moments when striving feels heavy, words feel unnecessary, and the silence becomes impossible to outrun. This is a story about those moments, about what happens when holding on costs more than letting go, about how silence, the very thing we fear, often carries the wisdom we've been avoiding. In a quiet town shaped by routine and unspoken dreams, there lived a man named Noah Hale. He believed that effort alone could save anything, relationships, purpose, even time itself. But life had other plans, and it would teach him, slowly and gently, that healing doesn't begin with force. It begins when we finally stop running. Noah Hale lived a life that most people would call stable, not exciting, not tragic, just steady. He woke up at the same time every morning before the sun had fully decided to rise. The room was always quiet then. No notifications, no voices, no demands. Just the soft hum of the world preparing itself. Noah liked that moment, or at least he told himself he did. He moved through his days with discipline, work done on time, responsibilities met, promises kept. He was the kind of man others relied on without ever really seeing. The kind who showed up early, stayed late, and never complained. Strength to him meant endurance, carrying weight without asking who put it there. But beneath the order of his routines lived a constant pressure, an unspoken noise that never fully went away. It followed him during his commute, filling the empty space between red lights. It sat beside him at dinner, where conversations felt rehearsed and shallow. It waited for him at night, when the lights were off and distractions were gone. Silence made that noise louder. Noah believed silence was dangerous. In silence, thoughts wandered. Memories resurfaced. Questions appeared without permission. So he stayed busy. He filled the gaps with work, lists, podcasts, anything that could keep him moving forward without looking inward. He told himself he was building something, a future, a sense of purpose, a life that made sense. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. He was running. Running from disappointment he hadn't named, running from grief he hadn't processed, running from the quiet understanding that some things in life could not be fixed through effort alone. On the surface, Noah seemed calm, measured, in control. Inside, he felt like a room where the radio never turned off, static layered with old conversations, missed chances, and expectations that no longer fit. He wanted peace, but he believed peace had to be earned, so he kept pushing, kept proving, kept holding on. He held on to routines even when they drained him, held on to roles even when they no longer reflected who he was, held on to versions of himself that had stopped growing. Letting go felt irresponsible. Stillness felt like surrender, and surrender in his mind meant weakness. What Noah didn't yet understand was this: silence wasn't the enemy. Silence was the space where truth waited patiently. But at this point in his journey, Noah wasn't ready to listen. He still believed strength meant control, that discipline meant resistance, that moving forward meant never stopping. And so he walked through his days unaware that the very thing he feared most, the quiet, would soon become unavoidable. Life has a way of doing that. It doesn't shout at first, it whispers, and when we refuse to listen, it finds another way to be heard. Noah believed discipline was the answer to everything. If something felt uncertain, he tightened his schedule. If something felt heavy, he worked longer. If something hurt, he ignored it and moved on. Control, he thought, was how you stayed safe. His days became carefully constructed. Wake early, work efficiently, exercise without fail, sleep on time. Every action had a purpose. Every hour was accounted for. There was comfort in that structure, in knowing what came next. Predictability gave him the illusion that nothing could fall apart if he stayed vigilant enough. And for a while, it worked. Small victories appeared, compliments at work, a sense of reliability others admired, moments where he felt almost proud of how much he could carry without breaking. He told himself this was strength, that resilience meant never slowing down. But beneath the surface, something subtle was happening. The more Noah controlled his life, the smaller it felt. Moments of joy became scheduled instead of spontaneous. Rest became something to earn, not something to receive. Conversations felt transactional, useful, polite, distant. He was present everywhere, yet deeply absent from himself. Still, he pushed, because letting go felt reckless, because stillness felt like giving up ground, because he had learned, somewhere along the way, that worth was measured by effort. So when life asked him to loosen his grip, he refused. When relationships required vulnerability instead of consistency, he chose consistency. When emotions surfaced that couldn't be solved, he buried them under productivity. When silence crept in, he drowned it out with motion. Noah didn't realize that control, when taken too far, becomes a cage. He mistook busyness for purpose, mistook discipline for identity, mistook endurance for healing. There were signs, of course, there always are. A tightness in his chest when plans changed unexpectedly, irritation at moments that disrupted his routine, an exhaustion that sleep never fully cured, but he ignored them. Signs are easy to dismiss when they don't scream. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that stability required sacrifice, that peace would come later, after one more goal, one more milestone, one more season of effort. What he didn't see was the quiet truth forming beneath it all. You cannot control life into loving you back. You cannot discipline your way out of grief, and you cannot outrun silence forever. The illusion of control is comforting because it feels active. Letting go feels passive, uncertain, unsafe. So Noah kept building walls out of habits and rules, believing they would protect him. He didn't know those same walls were slowly cutting him off, from connection, from meaning, from himself. And then, without warning, something shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to loosen the ground beneath his feet, and when control finally slips, it never does so gently. The moment everything changed did not arrive with drama. There was no warning sound, no clear sign, no pause to prepare. It came quietly, like most real losses do. One ordinary morning, Noah received news that fractured the careful structure of his life. The kind of news that doesn't shout, but settles into your chest and refuses to leave. A relationship he had assumed was permanent ended in a few measured sentences. Not out of anger, not out of betrayal, out of exhaustion. I don't feel you here anymore. That was all it took. The words replayed in his mind long after the conversation ended. He tried to respond with logic, with explanations, with promises of change built on effort, but none of it mattered. The decision had already been made in the quiet spaces he never entered. What Noah didn't lose was just a person. He lost certainty. He lost the future he had rehearsed. He lost the belief that discipline alone could preserve what mattered. The days that followed felt unreal. Time continued, but he didn't. He moved through routines on instinct, like a machine following commands long after the purpose had been removed. Work became harder, not because the tasks changed, but because the meaning did. The structure he once relied on now felt hollow. The praise he received no longer reached him. His calendar remained full, yet everything inside him felt strangely empty. At night, the silence he had avoided his entire life finally caught up to him. No music, no podcasts, no distractions. Just the echo of what he didn't say, what he didn't notice, what he postponed until later. He lay awake replaying moments he had dismissed as insignificant. Missed pauses, unasked questions, invitations to be present that he declined without realizing it. Control slipped through his fingers and there was nothing to replace it. He tried, of course. Tried working more. Tried fixing things through action. Tried convincing himself that this was temporary. But effort no longer produced results. The more he pushed, the heavier everything felt. His body carried tension it didn't know how to release. His mind searched for solutions where none existed. Life, once predictable, now felt unfamiliar and unstable. For the first time, Noah had to face something he'd spent years avoiding. Some things cannot be repaired. Some endings do not come with closure. Some losses are not failures, but they feel like them anyway. And in that realization, something inside him cracked. Not loudly, not visibly, but enough to change everything. This was the moment when his old rules stopped working, when discipline failed to protect him, when control revealed its limits. And standing in the aftermath, Noah felt something unfamiliar and terrifying: helplessness. Noah didn't accept the loss. Not really. He acknowledged it. Yes. He told people he was fine. He showed up, responded when spoken to, nodded at the right moments. But acceptance requires release. And Noah held on with everything he had left. He replayed the past like it was a problem waiting to be solved. If he had listened more, if he had slowed down, if he had noticed sooner. He told himself that understanding the mistake would undo the outcome, that clarity would reopen doors already closed. So he clung to memory, not because it brought comfort, but because it gave him something to grasp. Letting go felt like erasing meaning, like admitting that effort hadn't been enough, like saying goodbye without permission. So he resisted. He kept old messages, revisited familiar places, held conversations in his head that never happened in real life. The pain became familiar, sharp, constant, oddly grounding. It hurt, but at least it proved something mattered. At least it meant the loss was real. Silence, however, threatened to take even that. When there was nothing to replay, nothing to fix, nothing to analyze, the weight became unbearable. Silence meant there was no one left to argue with, not even himself. So Noah stayed mentally busy. He filled his mind with guilt disguised as responsibility, with self-blame masked as accountability, with longing reframed as loyalty. He believed that holding on was a form of respect, a sign of depth. But grief doesn't honor effort. It asks for surrender. Days blurred together. He stopped noticing the small details he once relied on for structure. Meals became optional. Sleep came in fragments. The world outside his thoughts felt distant, almost unreal. Friends reached out, unsure of what to say. Noah thanked them politely. then withdrew. Explaining the pain felt impossible, and honestly, he wasn't sure he wanted it to end, because pain at least felt like connection. Letting go felt like emptiness. He didn't realize that by holding what hurt, he was also holding himself in place, that clinging to the past was quietly stealing his future. What he feared most wasn't losing again. It was facing a life where the old version of him no longer worked, and no new version had yet appeared. So he stayed where he was, in between, suspended, emotionally paralyzed, waiting for something to change without changing himself. But life does not wait forever, and eventually, when resistance exhausts itself, silence takes over, not as an enemy, but as a mirror. Noah was about to face the quiet he had been avoiding, and this time there would be no distraction strong enough to keep it away. Silence eventually becomes unavoidable. For Noah, it arrived not as a dramatic collapse, but as a slow withdrawal from everything that once filled his days. He stopped staying late at work, stopped answering messages right away, stopped pretending he was moving forward. The world didn't notice at first. It rarely does. He spent more time alone in his apartment, a place that now felt larger than it ever had. Rooms echoed, clocks sounded louder, even his own breathing felt intrusive in the stillness. This was the quietest room he had ever been in. Not because there was no sound, but because there was nothing left to distract him from himself. Days passed without shake. He sat by the window some mornings, watching people move with purpose he no longer recognized. They had somewhere to go, something to become. He felt like a paused frame in a film that kept playing without him. At night, the weight pressed heavier. Memories came without invitation, not just of the loss, but of everything he had avoided feeling long before. Old disappointments, unspoken fears, the realization that much of his life had been built around endurance, not fulfillment. He asked himself questions he had never allowed before. Who am I without effort? Who am I without being needed? Who am I when there's nothing to fix? There were no answers, just more silence. And in that emptiness, something frightening emerged. Numbness. Not sadness, not anger, just a dull absence where emotion used to be. This was the lowest point, not because the pain was unbearable, but because it felt endless, because nothing seemed to move, including him, because even hope felt like something that belonged to another version of his life. Yet hidden in that stillness was a truth Noah couldn't yet see. When everything is stripped away, roles, routines, expectations, what remains is not weakness. It is raw awareness. For the first time, Noah wasn't running. Not because he had chosen to stop, but because he had nowhere left to go. And in that forced stillness, life prepared to meet him differently. Change doesn't always begin with motivation. Sometimes it begins with exhaustion. And in the quietest room, with nothing left to hold on to, Noah stood at the edge of something new. Though it didn't look like hope yet. It looked like emptiness. But emptiness, when met honestly, becomes space. And space is where transformation begins. The moment that shifted everything did not feel important at first. There was no speech, no revelation, no sudden clarity. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind Noah had been drifting through for weeks. He had gone for a walk without intention, letting his feet decide the direction. The streets were quiet, washed in the soft light of a late day that wasn't in a hurry. He sat on a bench near a small park, watching leaves fall without resistance. That's when he noticed the old man. He sat a few feet away, feeding birds with slow, deliberate movements. No phone, no rush, just presence. The birds trusted him enough to come close. They sat in silence for a long while, and then, without turning, the man spoke. "You don't look lost," he said. "You look tired of holding." The words landed gently, but precisely. Noah didn't respond at first. He didn't need to. Something in him had already recognized the truth. The man wasn't asking for an explanation. He wasn't offering advice. He was simply noticing. After a pause, Noah spoke quietly. "If I let go, it feels like I'll lose everything." The man smiled, not with amusement, but with understanding. "You already lost what couldn't stay," he said. "Letting go just stops the bleeding." They sat again in silence. Noah watched the birds, how they came and went without apology, how none of them tried to hold on to the moment longer than it lasted. The man stood up slowly, brushing crumbs from his hands. "Stillness isn't giving up," he said as he walked away. "It's how you hear what's been waiting to speak." And just like that, he was gone. No name, no lecture, no instructions. But something inside Noah shifted. For the first time, silence didn't feel hostile. It felt neutral, like a space that could be listened to instead of fought. That evening, Noah went home and did something unfamiliar. He sat. No distractions, no effort, just breathing. Thoughts came. Memories surfaced. Feelings rose and fell. He didn't chase them, didn't push them away. He let them pass like the birds in the park. It was uncomfortable, then unfamiliar, then quietly relieving. He realized something simple and profound. He had been trying to control pain instead of allowing it to move through him. And pain, when given space, softens. This wasn't healing yet, but it was the beginning of honesty. And honesty is where rebirth always starts. Healing did not arrive as relief. It arrived as practice. The morning after the encounter, Noah woke up with the same weight in his chest, the same uncertainty, the same unanswered questions. Nothing external had changed, but something subtle had shifted in how he met the day. He didn't reach for his phone immediately, didn't plan the day in his head, didn't rush to outrun the quiet. Instead, he sat on the edge of his bed and breathed. It felt awkward, almost pointless, but he stayed, long enough to notice the tension in his shoulders, long enough to feel the resistance in his thoughts, long enough to realize how rarely he had allowed himself to simply exist without fixing. Letting go, he learned, was not a single decision. It was a discipline, a quiet one. He began with small acts of release, not revisiting old messages, leaving certain questions unanswered, allowing moments to pass without assigning meaning to them. Each act felt like stepping into cold water, uncomfortable at first, but strangely clarifying. Silence became part of his routine, not as something to conquer, but something to respect. Some days were harder than others. Grief returned without warning. Old habits tugged at him, tempting him to analyze, control, or distract. When that happened, he noticed the urge without following it. This was new strength. Not force, not endurance, but restraint. Noah started walking again, slowly, without destination. He paid attention to things he used to miss, the sound of footsteps, the way light changed throughout the day, the quiet dignity of things that didn't rush. He wasn't happier yet, but he was more present. and presence brought something he hadn't felt in a long time: honesty. He admitted what he had lost, admitted what he could not change, admitted that part of his pain came from trying to be someone he no longer was. Letting go didn't erase the past, it loosened its grip. There were moments when he felt fear, fear that without constant effort he would disappear. But the more he practiced stillness, the more he realized something unexpected. He wasn't fading, he was returning to a version of himself that didn't need to perform to be worthy, that didn't equate control with safety, that understood peace wasn't earned through suffering. This was not transformation yet. It was preparation, like clearing a field before new growth can begin. And though the journey ahead would test him, Noah had taken the first real step forward, not by pushing harder, but by finally setting something down. Letting go does not erase old habits, it challenges them. Just as Noah began to feel steadier, life tested the ground he was standing on. Familiar pressures returned, deadlines, expectations, subtle demands to become who he used to be. The world hadn't changed, it still rewarded speed, certainty, and control, and part of him missed that clarity. There were mornings when he woke with the urge to fill every minute again, to rebuild the armor of productivity, to prove, once more, that he could carry everything without asking for help. The old pull was strong. He noticed how easily his mind reached for familiar patterns, planning obsessively, replaying conversations, measuring his worth by how useful he felt. These habits had once protected him. Now they threatened to undo the quiet progress he'd made. This was the real test, not the pain of loss, but the temptation of familiarity. Some days he slipped, he overworked, overthought, overextended, and each time the tension returned, not as punishment but as a signal. Instead of judging himself, Noah paused. He learned to notice the difference between discipline and avoidance, between structure that supports and structure that suffocates. He reminded himself that strength wasn't about never falling back. It was about recognizing when you had. Consistency replaced intensity. He returned to stillness not as an escape, but as a recalibration. When silence felt uncomfortable, he stayed with it. When fear surfaced, he named it instead of resisting it. This time he didn't run. Slowly, trust formed. Not in outcomes, not in certainty, but in his ability to respond without losing himself. He realized that letting go wasn't passive, it required courage. The courage to remain open when control felt safer. The courage to stay present when distraction offered relief. The old pull didn't disappear, but it no longer led. And in that shift, Noah discovered a quieter form of strength, one that didn't announce itself, but endured. Peace did not arrive all at once. It arrived in fragments, small, almost unremarkable moments that Noah might have ignored in another life. A morning where he woke without the weight of urgency. An afternoon where silence felt spacious instead of empty. An evening where he noticed he was breathing deeply without trying. Stillness had stopped feeling like an absence. It felt like presence. Noah moved through his days with a gentler rhythm now. He worked, but without attaching his identity to outcomes. He spoke, but without rehearsing every word. He rested, not because he was exhausted, but because rest no longer felt undeserved. Purpose began to form quietly, not as a grand mission, not as a reinvention, but as alignment. He started choosing what mattered, not what proved something. He said no more often, not out of defiance, but clarity. He listened without waiting to respond. He allowed moments to be unfinished, and something unexpected happened. People felt closer to him, not because he did more, but because he was there, fully, honestly, without armor, without performance. The silence he once feared now softened his presence. It made space for others to breathe too. He realized that peace wasn't the absence of struggle, it was the absence of resistance. The loss that once defined him no longer controlled him. It still existed, but it no longer demanded constant attention. It had become part of his story, not the center of it. Stillness had become home, not a place to hide, but a place to return. A place where he could hear himself clearly. A place where nothing needed to be forced. A place where life could unfold without being managed. Noah understood now that wisdom doesn't arrive through noise or urgency. It emerges when we stop interrupting ourselves. And standing in that quiet understanding, he felt something steady and real, not happiness, but peace. This is where the story turns toward you, because Noah's journey was never just his. It mirrors a truth many of us learn too late, that we spend years running from silence, only to discover it was never chasing us. It was waiting. You may recognize the pattern: staying busy so you don't feel, holding on so you don't have to grieve, controlling what you can because uncertainty feels unbearable. But silence teaches gently if we allow it. It teaches that discipline without awareness becomes a prison. That strength is not how much you can endure, but how honestly you can listen. That letting go is not failure. It is respect for what has already taught you its lesson. Silence teaches that healing is not dramatic. It is quiet, repetitive, and deeply personal. It looks like choosing presence over performance. Like setting something down without replacing it immediately. Like trusting that you are still worthy even when you are not producing, fixing, or proving. It teaches that pain softens when it is no longer resisted, that peace appears when you stop demanding certainty, that rebirth doesn't arrive as a new identity, but as a return to yourself. If you are in a season of noise, exhaustion, or quiet grief, know this: you are not behind, you are not broken, you are not weak for feeling tired of holding on. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is pause, to sit with the silence instead of filling it, to listen instead of react, to let go, not all at once, but gently, honestly, in your own time. Like Noah, you don't need to become someone else. You only need to stop running from who you already are. And if this story stayed with you, if it reminded you of something you've been carrying quietly, then take that as a sign to breathe, a sign to rest, a sign to trust the stillness. If this story helped you feel understood, consider sharing it with someone who may need it. And if you'd like more stories like this, calm, reflective, and human, remember to like, subscribe, and return, because sometimes the most powerful journeys begin not with movement, but with silence.